look. Hello, everyone. Can people online let me know if you can hear okay?
Do you want to be able to walk?
Cool, thank you. I think everyone can hear fine. Are you happy with that?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay. Now,
We tried.
no. Did you want some tea? Oh, this, yes. Do you want that at that level?
What a great idea. Yeah, this.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And most importantly, thank you, Annalie, for being here. Annalie is a visiting PhD student who's come from Norway, which is so exciting, from the Metropolitan University of Oslo Met. Her PhD project explores nutrition policy related to cross-sector partnerships. She's obtained a Master of Science in Public Health Nutrition from Oslo Met in 2017 and has been involved in policy evaluation research as well as advocacy related to food marketing aimed at children, which is really interesting and a topic that's very close to everyone's hearts. Currently, she's undertaking a research stay here in the school, which is really lovely, working with Catherine Cullerton. So Catherine is an apology today because she's had to race over to St. Lucia to give a lecture, but over to you, Annalie. Thank you so much for presenting to us this afternoon.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me fine. And I'd also like to thank Alison for introducing me. And of course, thanks for the opportunity to present my PhD work for you here at UQ. And thanks for people in the room and anybody online for coming as well. And of course, thanks to Catherine Cullerton and the School of Public Health who made it possible for me to have this research stay here. And that has also been funded by Oslo Met back in Norway. Before I start, I have one declaration. And today I'll be presenting on a research partnership that is co-funded by food industry, but I'd like to say quite clearly that my PhD position and my operating budget is funded by Oslo Metropolitan University and by the Research Council of Norway. So I'm not personally industry funded. Let's see, I need to do this on two different things. So, okay, I'll start by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the land on where we meet today, the Turrbal and Jagera people. I pay my respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge their continuing connection to land, culture, and community. And as a visitor to this country, I'm happy for the opportunity to meet and learn here. Okay, so today I'll start by introducing you really broadly to the Norwegian context in which I do my PhD project. Then I'll turn to the research partnership on which I do my research on collaboration processes. Before I turn to my studies, 3 studies that is part of my PhD and some preliminary findings from them. And I'll start with a little bit on the Norwegian context, just so you understand a bit where I come from. So Norway is it's a large country with a small population, just a little larger than New Zealand. We have a social democratic government characterized by having strong and stable state institutions combined with elements of market liberalism. In Norway, there's a long tradition for formal engagement between state and non-state actors in policy development. And one reason for that is often claimed to be a really high level of trust between different societal stakeholders in Norway. So making that engagement possible, not kind of a conflictual relationship between different societal stakeholders. I also wanted to say just a little bit about diet-related health. So as most high-income countries, there's a large percentage of the people living with overweight and obesity in Norway. Around 65% of the adult population is estimated to live with either overweight or obesity, 25% with obesity. Around a quarter of the adult population manages to meet recommendations for fruit and veg, full grain intake, whereas for most population groups, intake of saturated fat and sodium is exceeding the recommendation levels. And there's ongoing discussions on how to deal with this policy-wise. And as in many high-income and other countries, Norway often tends to lean towards softer measures like voluntary partnerships and to some extent also industry self-regulation, although there are some developments that seem to go in another and more strict direction now. And I would be happy to talk more about that later on. So let's see, I'll turn now from the more overall context to the concrete research partnership where I do my studies. And I'm sorry, I need to choose between looking at the screens here and looking at you. So I'll see you back there. Okay, so the case where I do my PhD is on this cross-sector partnership that is called NewTools. And that is a research project started in 2021, will be finished in December this year, that is led by the Norwegian Institute of Public Health. And in Norway, the Public Institute, it has kind of two mandates. First, it is a government agency with a mandate to give policy recommendations to the Ministry of Health, but it's also an independent research institution that is applying and dependent on external funding as any other research institution. And it is in that capacity that it leads this project. So the NewTools project was a response to a research for a funding call from the Norwegian Research Council for collaborative projects involving different sectors of society to address food systems challenges. Let's see. So what is it exactly what NewTools aims to address? So the funding call asks for projects that address food systems challenges, and NewTools seeks to develop methodologies and tools to address three really main and overarching challenges that are associated with food systems. First, the problem of unhealthy diets and diet-related ill health. Secondly, the climate and environmental footprint of food production and consumption. And thirdly, inequitable conditions in food value chains, such as poor working conditions. So it's kind of really broad areas of problems that NewTools is kind of seeking to create some changes to. And I'll go on to describing what I mean by tools, the tools in NewTools in the next slide. So in practice, the tools in NewTools are food profiling models, and there are some nutrition people in the room, and you will know that food profiling models are scientific models that are made to rank and assess different qualities of foods. So it could be nutritional quality, considering positive and negative nutrients. And in the case of environmental and social sustainability, it will kind of be indicators that say something about how these foods influence or their footprint on either climate or environmental issues or social issues. So the project aims to develop two food profiling models, one for nutritional quality and one for environmental and social sustainability. And the overall thinking in NewTools is that these profiling models can be used as basis to underpin more concrete measures in the food system. So a food profiling model can be used to underpin food labeling, for example. It can be used to guide food reformulation. It could be used also to guide other policy measures, either by policy stakeholders or researchers, for example, through monitoring, or by food industry themselves. So this makes NewTools a really policy-related project that is kind of delivering some research outputs that could be used most efficiently if it is used by many, many stakeholders and at different levels of the food system. Next, I will say something about the model, the governance model in NewTools, because that is organized as a cross-sector research partnership and formally involves 4 groups of partners: researchers leading the research activities, representatives from government agencies. We have 3 different: Directorate of Health, Directorate of Agriculture, and the Food Safety Authority of Norway. There's also 13 participants representing food industry, from food production to retail, and 5 representatives from civil society. And there are 2 main reasons for choosing a partnership model in the NewTools project. And the first one is really pragmatic. It was required by the Research Council. And they also required that at least 10% of the budget would need to be in-kind funding from non-research partners. So this means that 6 of the food industry partners are contributing towards the budget with oh, I'm sorry, just lost all sense of English language. They cover their own expenses towards contributing, and they report also their hours to the Norwegian Research Council, but none of that funding flows towards the research itself. But I talked about the rationale, so that was kind of the pragmatic rationale, and then there's more a normative rationale, because there is an assumption in NewTools that collaboration with different stakeholders will benefit the project. So the thought is that researchers, when they gain access to perspectives outside of their own research fields, will be able to develop food profiling models that are more feasible, easier to perhaps implement, and that has more support from a range of food system stakeholders. And I think it's appropriate at this stage to say that I don't necessarily share that assumption. My professional perspective is that these partnerships have several disadvantages, and I will come back to that later. And I should also say that the model of collaboration, like overall, is that it is researchers that have the responsibility for making decisions, while other stakeholders have the right to kind of be heard and contribute to the project, but not a right to be considered or taken, that those inputs are actually acted upon. So that was kind of the overall setup of NewTools. And now I turn more towards my own project and my studies on collaboration between these different stakeholders. And that is what I've here on the slide called the however in NewTools. Because the reason that I think it's worthwhile to focus on collaboration processes is that even though partnerships are encouraged and popular policy models in many contexts, for example, as seen here, raised by the UN Sustainable Development Goals, there's increasing interest in really important challenges that is associated with these systems. And let's see. And within public health, these different perspectives are provided by different areas of expertise and specialties. So, for example, we have epidemiological evidence that have indicated that food policy partnerships made to improve the healthiness of food environments aren't really effective in achieving that. We have a large, both conceptual and an empirical literature from the commercial determinants of health field, indicating that commercial actors can and will use policy partnerships and research in order to protect their own interests rather than that of public health. And a related body of literature, for example, developed by Catherine Cullerton here, has provided really useful guidelines in order to help both researchers and policymakers in how to plan partnerships in order to protect and manage conflicts of interest. And the main take-home message from all these bodies of literature is that conflicts of interests are real and important. They can seriously undermine work towards public health and should be considered by a range of stakeholders. What is perhaps missing, or at least more an emerging field of study, is research that tries to make sense of what is actually going on within these partnerships. What is happening in the collaboration processes between stakeholders that have really different levels of power, different interests and values that are represented. And that kind of evidence could help contribute and expand the body of literature overall, and also help inform how we can set up partnerships in the future if they are found to be worthwhile. So that is what kind of the rationale for my field of study. And also in a Nordic context where we have this issue of trust, and partnerships are really encouraged and applied all over, I think it can be really important to try and identify some both barriers and challenges for these forms of partnerships. Let's see, so we're slowly progressing towards my PhD project. And that's the research gap that I talked about. So the aim of my project is to explore both barriers and facilitators for nutrition policy related cross-sector partnership through experiences from the NewTools project. And that will be done through 3 different research questions with corresponding studies. And the first question is, what elements should be included in a framework to guide engagement between stakeholders in NewTools? And that was actually an ask from the project management, who wanted to establish a framework to operationalize how the project could facilitate involvement on one hand, kind of really get use of the competence that all these actors have, while also protecting against conflicts of interest, because it's quite obvious that there are large conflicts of interest in that project. So we developed a framework in an iterative process that was guided by recommendations for methodological framework development, and also informed by content from the World Health Organization's Framework of Engagement of Non-State Actors, often called FEMSA. Now, research questions 2 and 3 turn to the perspectives of involved stakeholders. So in 2022 and 2024, I performed qualitative individual interviews with project partners involved in the project. I spoke to 17 of them in 2022 about their expectations towards participating. And then in 2024, we discussed experiences from the process. And both rounds of interviews were analyzed using reflexive thematic analysis. I want to take just a little sidestep now to explain to you where I kind of sit in that project, because I'm sort of an insider in NewTools, trying to make sense of what is going on there, but also an outsider, and I will tell you why. So in NewTools, like in almost all, I guess, research projects, there are different work packages that have responsibility for different tasks. So my main position in NewTools is in work package 1. That is kind of cross-cutting work package, focusing on stakeholder involvement. So my research kind of takes a meta perspective on the collaboration that is going on in the project. I also have a more practical role in a work package called work package 4 that is trying to test applications with interested stakeholders, different applications of these food profiling models that they are trying to develop. But the core content of NewTools is kind of the scientific development of these food profiles, and that is going on in work package 2 and 3, where I don't have any role. But whenever there are engagement activities like meetings or seminars or workshops, I will attend those. So I kind of, in addition to the interviews that I make, I've done a lot of observations during these years. So my role in NewTools is kind of a combination between outsider and insider, and that has obviously influenced the way I've done this work. And I would have liked to speak more about that in this presentation, but there wasn't time. But I would love to share some reflections on that later on, because that hasn't been without its challenges. Yeah, I will say just 2 words about that later on. Okay, so I'll move now to some preliminary findings, and I will focus on the qualitative interviews. So this is from the first round of interviews that I did when we talked about expectations. And let's see, just have to find my notes. So conceptual literature on partnership, they posit that there are certain conditions that are present at the outset of a partnership that will kind of influence the collaboration processes, and hence the progress of that project going forwards, but also in the long term, its outcomes. Some conditions may facilitate collaboration and some will hinder them. And the interviews suggested some factors that could be seen as facilitators for collaboration. So firstly, there was or seemed to be kind of a strong collaboration spirit among those that were participating. And in many ways, it's not surprising when people are they have been invited into a voluntary research project. You couldn't expect that there would be kind of collaborators in that space. But almost all participants emphasized that it was really important to include as many perspectives as possible in this kind of complex work in food systems. And there was an interesting sense also that it was more important to get all these perspectives on the table than it was to prevent conflicts of interest. So that perspective wasn't really present at most participants, although some of the researchers mentioned that this is something that we really need to be aware of. There were also quite a few challenges, and I have flagged this, and this is one of the things that I perhaps wouldn't do back in Norway when I'm presenting this project internally. Yeah, so that is one of the ways that having an insider role can be a little bit challenging. So first of all, among a range of almost all the participants, except from the researchers, and I think one civil society organization, there was kind of opposition towards not food profiling in general, but towards the nutrition profile. So that was, it kind of asks immediately or questions whether the project has managed to establish a wide range of perspectives to inform this work. It was also really interesting to see that NewTools was to quite a large extent considered to be a policy project more than a pure research project. So it was considered to be development of food labeling policy. So kind of indicating also that this was kind of a sensitive issue for quite a lot of the stakeholders involved. Also, a challenge that I identified at that stage was that several stakeholders seemed to have expectations to be really directly involved in decision making, which was not the same model of collaboration as the researchers described. So there was a question whether people had actually kind of understood the model they were involved in. And there were some signs of power asymmetries and mistrust also between the different groups of stakeholders. So for example, civil society described themselves as the weak ones, whereas they considered food industry to be much more able to influence what was going to happen in the project. Then it was the next round of interviews that I just did. And these are really preliminary findings that I'm struggling with analyzing as we speak. So it's not really untangled yet, but I think there are some things that can be presented either way. So also after, as in the first round of interviews, there was still a sense of value related to the concept of collaboration in this project. So I think almost all of the interviewees said that this has been really beneficial for us. We have learned so much. We have had networking opportunities. We should continue with this formal partnership later on. But there had been some challenges as well, and some of them quite important. So it was really clear that for a range of the stakeholders, especially from food industry, food profiling systems aren't only scientific models that could have some theoretic value. They are really potential threats for their actions and practices. So they had felt partly uncomfortable, especially towards the work with the nutrition profiling system, where they feared that they could be held accountable for validating kind of something that they thought could be implemented in the future and influencing them negatively. And it also was quite clear that a range or several of the food industry actors were there more to have perhaps control or be informed about policy developments rather than having a specific role or a concrete role towards making research happen. Partly because of this, there had been less partner engagement than expected in the project. And for food industry, this probably has to do with a lack of will, because this is so conflictual. Whereas for civil society, it has probably got to do with lack of capacity and expertise. So someone said to me that it's great being here. We're not really sure what we managed to convey into this project, because we don't have either the capacity or the technical insight that is needed. So, yeah. And also something interesting but not surprising was that the power distribution models led to different temperatures in the project. So there was one work package that tried to have restricted engagement. That was the nutrition profiling one. And that was where things got really heated, because the participants felt that they hadn't really been involved in large and important decisions concerning kind of what direction the project was taking. Whereas a work package with more active engagement was much less conflictual. But on the other hand, they struggled to actually get people on board and to help them do some research. So I would say that in total, the findings indicate that the project hadn't really understood how political it was, how close to a policy world, and what that would mean in terms of engaging stakeholders with deep interests towards the food profiling models. So Phoebe, you asked me to take with me some take-home messages, and in one sense, it feels a bit early since this project is still going on, but on the other hand, I think it can be, there's something I can raise already now. And I would say that the recommendations or the learnings that I raise now, all of them are directly related to a range of recommendations coming from public health literature, both grey literature policy recommendations by the World Health Organization, for example, and also Catherine's work from this house. So first, going from perhaps least important to most important, I would say that communication is key when you deal with different people with different interests, but also different languages. It's so important to be sure that you have them on board and actually agreeing on what it is this project is going to be about before you start. Also pick your partners wisely and empower the weak ones, because it seemed to be a really big challenge in this project that food industry was relatively heavier represented than civil society, and civil society partly lacked capacity to any meaningful involvement. So they should probably be raised. And of course, I think all of this points to the point of acknowledging or assessing to what extent a project is political and how that will influence the way that people act when they are within a formal research partnership. Try and understand their motivations for joining. But I think the overall question that is really needs reflecting upon is whether a formal partnership, will it actually benefit the research or will it not? So I think in NewTools, for example, they had formal partners that weren't really willing to engage to the extent that had been planned. So most likely they would have managed to reach the same conclusions by consulting with stakeholders that were not formal partners, but then they wouldn't have had the financing. So I think it's not easy. And I also think that this, in the Norwegian context at least, it needs to be raised quite a lot. Yeah, I spoke with Catherine yesterday and she said that this project would never have happened in Australia because we would have understood how political it was and how many conflicts of interests there were. Okay, so I'm stopping with that and I wanted to show you something a little bit exotic. So this is the driveway to my house now in the middle of winter. So thank you for listening, and please, if you have any questions.
Much, Annalie, that was so interesting. And I was thinking, hang on a minute, this wouldn't be happening here. You folks are so forward thinking. And so it's like, oh no, you were also having problems.
Yes, yeah.
I mean, instantly I just started thinking of if the food profiling that you talk about is fascinating and you think of salmon, great. No, it gives you such really important grounded understanding. But yes, I was wondering how you were getting away with doing it, then clearly not. So then comment from me, but others, questions in the room, questions online. I welcome anyone for any further comments or discussion, but a fantastic and very interesting presentation.
I have presented for Kerry and Stephanie before, but with a slightly different angle. So yeah, did it make more sense this time? I hope so. Yeah.
It was a bit lacking without the cat.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you've always got to include the cat pictures of the dog pictures. Absolutely, they can't be left out. Are there any questions online?
I've got the chat up.
No? Oh, fantastic.
I was wondering, when you look at, I just think of like there's the star rating system and stuff here. And, you're talking about like salmon with how it's been, whether it's been farmed sustainably or anything like that.
Yeah.
You feel like you're a lot further ahead on that sort of stuff than what Australia is from your short time of being
No,
here.
and that was a contextual point that I could have raised, because in Norway we have a food labeling scheme, but that is only on foods that meet certain recommendations. So, or I don't remember now what you call it, but approval stamp, sort of, the Nordic keyhole. Yeah, that is used on food categories, the relative healthier foods within a certain food categories. But it wouldn't be, you couldn't use it on snacks, for example. So that's a part of the larger discussion in Norway, which also influences the work in NewTools, because food industry, they love the keyhole because it only kind of approves the healthier stuffs and it doesn't punish more unhealthy foods. So this work with this food profile could potentially lead to something that is more threatening for them, something towards something similar to the health rating system or the Nutri-Score that is implemented in Europe. And they do have their weaknesses, but I think they are more effective in guiding consumer choices compared to that kind of approval stamp way to do it. Did that answer your question?
Yes, it did.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing, oh, sorry, now I'm going to take over. The other thing I was wondering is, you know, when you think of like the health star rating, if there was something like that being developed in a way, do you think from this process that industry would look at changing their products to try and meet particular, you know, say, oh, we could get this from a 3-star up to a 4-star if we made these changes?
I think they probably would. But that's, yeah, been one of the large discussions in the project that would, in some instances, that would probably be good. And in other instances, that would perhaps lead to more food processing. Because what happens when you take out the sugar and the salt and the fat, perhaps especially, and what do you actually replace it with? Yeah, but it would probably lead to some sort of reformulation actions, I would say. Yeah.
Just the transparency, particularly not even thinking about packaged and processed foods, but transparency around farmed foods, that actually having to demonstrate how that food was grown. And I do come back to the notion of salmon, obviously, for all that's happening at the moment. But if we think about, you know, mass organics and a whole range of things, there would be potential to, you know, uncover and critique a lot.
Yes. Yes.
So if you could get it off the ground,
yeah. And but it also yeah, that's a more technical discussion, but in NewTools, the overall idea is to kind of develop food profiles that leads to a summary score. And it's nice to have a summary score, but you don't really know what's behind there. What is climate? What is environment? What is food? What is food safety wouldn't be in there because that would kind of be taken for granted, but what is animal welfare? Yeah, social conditions. So yeah, it would take a lot of work with making all these data available for end users.
but again, give us so much more.
Yeah, yeah. And in Europe and in Norway, there's a kind of a gazillion different labeling schemes for climate and sustainability. So it's really difficult for consumers to navigate that space.
So in the Australian context, where there's concern about conflicts of interest and there's a lot more direct lobbying as opposed to collaborative policy development, in Norway, where the collaborative policy development is more acceptable, do you feel that there's less direct lobbying of policymakers by industry?
No, I don't think so. But I think it's less focus on it from, for example, from the public health community. And I also think that perhaps due to this sense of trust, contact between food industry and governments is probably seen as it's not problematized. So there's there's a formal public-private partnership in Norway between the food authorities and food industry that meet regularly on high level with the health ministers. They have so easy access to policymakers, and that is kind of informal settings. And then you have the lobbying and everything that we don't know about. So it could be that it's actually more institutionalized in Norway.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for a fantastic presentation. No questions online. Thank you very much.
Thank you.